Hi, it's Allie, and I just want to quickly check in about 1950s television. So, one of the things we've been studying so far is how TV at this time period is really a guest in one's home. And so, I really want everyone to have that overriding philosophy at the forefront of our studies. And so, we looked at how television emerges in 1939 at the New York City World's Fair. That's considered the public debut of television in America. And then we don't really see a huge amount of TV until the late 1940s, and then we jump right to the 1950s. And the reason for that, of course, is World War II. Now, a lot of the technological advancements that come forward in the war, things like radar, etc., also inform the television technology. And so by the time World War II is over and we're ready to enter back into the American sphere with a medium of entertainment such as television, it's advanced significantly in the decade. So the war years do impact television, but there's just not a lot of broadcast TV in this country at that time, and it doesn't really reach a greater audience until the late 40s into the 1950s. And so that's why we kind of jump right to the 1950s here in our studies. And so we've looked at how radio, film, and then the live tradition of vaudeville are really influences for early television. We've looked at Texaco Star Theater, which is on NBC, and that stars Milton Berle, also known as Uncle Milty, and he's a little bit of a wild character, but he's still kind of someone who you would invite into your home. He's a little bit more like the wild uncle, the relative who comes over and makes jokes, maybe is a little bit inappropriate, but not too much, and he's still a welcome part of the environment. We contrast that with Ed Sullivan over on Toast of the Town, and that's on CBS. That's seen as a more classy or artful production, where in addition to popular musicians, there might have even been scenes from plays or opera singers who performed on that show. And at this time period, New York City is really the epicenter of television production in this country. We also have film being created in Hollywood and LA, and so this is really a coastal situation. And then more and more stations start to emerge in America. And in 1948, we start to have a station in Chicago that becomes really influential and prominent. And that's WMAQ, also known as Channel 5, NBC, in the Chicago area. And in the late 1940s into the 1950s, like say 1948 through 51 or so, what emerges from this station is what's called the Chicago School of Programming. And so I've kind of made reference here already to one specific station, and Jules Herbeveau was the station manager at this time of Channel 5, and he really believed in television should be honest, authentic. And that kind of philosophy really carries over into all of what is referred to as the Chicago School of Programming. And although I've pointed out an NBC affiliate where a lot of these shows were created in the Chicago area, I really need to emphasize that the Chicago School of Programming isn't just one network. It's a style of programming that was heavily influenced and created on at the WMAQ studios, but some of these shows also showed up on different networks. Some of them did air on NBC, but there's also a fourth network of television in this era. Besides the big three, besides NBC, CBS, and then the third at the very bottom was ABC in this time period. There's the original fourth network of broadcast television in the 1950s, and that's a network called DuMont. And DuMont made really great technological advances with television. They had great cameras, a lot of the kinescopes that are still saved for television history for posterity. That was through DuMont's technological advancements. They also made sets, and then they created programming for the channels that would then be shown on the sets created by the cameras that they made. So Dumont kind of did it all, and it was a one of the channels where some of these one of the networks that some of these Chicago School of Programming shows would also appear on. Now, unfortunately, we lose the Dumont network by the mid 1950s, and it just couldn't keep up with television as TV starts to move to the coasts, to LA in particular, in the mid 1950s. But I want to really emphasize the Chicago School of Programming. I've heard from students in the past who go off to internships or who have jobs after I've mentioned this Chicago style, and they've written back emailing me like, hey, you know what, I was at an internship and somebody brought up the Chicago style, the Chicago School of Programming, and I was like, oh, shoo, I knew about it from your class. And so I want you all to kind of be familiar with this from our intro history of television class here. And part of it is location. There's not that many television majors in this country, and so when people find out that you studied in Chicago, they're going to expect you to have a little bit of familiarity with this school of programming. And although this didn't last for a significant amount of time, it is happening when the template for what television will be is created. And scholars and industry professionals still look back at this style of programming as an important one. So again, this is late 40s into the 50s, and some of the shows that were created that are still really fondly remembered that are part of this style of programming is Garraway at Large, and that stars Dave Garraway, and it really accentuates some of the aspects of this style that are throughout what is called the Chicago School of Programming. And that's improvisation is really key. It's either scriptless or very kind of vague scripts where they put a setting, a scene, and then in rehearsals, the cast would start to figure out what to actually say. So this is a heavily improvised television style, sometimes entirely scriptless, and there's interpretive camera movement. So as Dave Garraway's, the Garraway at Large show is a musical variety program, and he's the host of it, and he's really wandering through the studio looking at things and exclaiming about them to the camera. And again, this is when TV itself is a new medium, so even the performers aren't quite used to the cameras or the boom mics coming in. And Dave Garraway will make references, kind of breaking the fourth wall and referencing the actual audio and video equipment as it's filming him. And so that's kind of an interesting show. Another one is Kukla, Fran, and Ollie, and we have a clip of this in our screenings. And this is one of the most famous children's shows of this era. It's basically a puppet show, and it's meant for children, and it really kind of is the template for what children's programming can end up being. And so these are the first ideas happening here at this time period in television. And so we see a show like that. And Kukla, Fran, and Ollie also shows some of the other aspects of this style of programming, this attitude that the Chicago School of Programming brings. And that's really like warm and fuzzy television. It's friendly. It feels good. There's an educational component. And so one of the things that we don't see happening here until the late 1960s, early 1970s, is when PBS emerges. So this is way before PBS, before we even have the idea of a national education television network. We have what will end up being precursors to PBS. And so some of the Chicago School of Programming, the aesthetic, the feeling, the attitude, you can see it on television today on PBS. And so although the Chicago style doesn't stick with us through all of television, it does write the template and kind of set what television can be. And then I just want to mention one other really important show from this era, and that's called Studs Place. And Studs Terkel is one of the main players in Studs Place. And of course, Studs Terkel is a very famous actor, TV broadcaster, TV personality, but he also goes on to become a Pulitzer Prize winning author. And in 1985, he actually won the Pulitzer Prize for The Good War, which is an oral history of World War II. And so it really is a champion of the everyday people, the working class, regular types. And Stud's Place is a show like that. It's set at a diner, and you really get to know the people in the neighborhood, in the area. It's set in the northwest side of Chicago, and you get to kind of really see a glimpse of actual life, as close as television might be able to present what's really happening to real everyday people. And it's interesting to people at the time. And one of the quotes that Studs Terkel has about not just Stud's Place, but about the Chicago style in general is, "It was jazz, it was improvised." And so it's a different type of programming than we might see in general. And there's not that many improvised shows in all of the history of television. There's definitely some. You'll think of some. I can think of Reno 911. That's more of a contemporary show. And we will look at a show that airs on the Dumont Network originally, and the Dumont Network ends up saving, with its technology, saving a lot of these episodes. And that's a show called The Honeymooners with Jackie Gleason. And so this kind of improvisational shows are with us from television's inception, but they kind of become rarer. And so looking at this kind of quiet, casual, spontaneous, looking at the everyday person with the Chicago School of Programming, I just wanted us to kind of stop and look at that, especially when you're all in Chicago. You're going to enter the industry with a degree from a college from Chicago. This might actually come up, say you go to semester in LA, and as you interact with industry professionals, and they're like, "Oh, you're from Columbia." And so I just want you all to have a familiarity of what Chicago has offered television history. And of course, Chicago continues to this day to be a space of production, of creation. And there's been shows throughout history that have aired in Chicago and have done so proudly. Maybe the most famous one was the Oprah Winfrey Show, which of course held, a top television spot for quite some time. But we still have shows that are filming and being created in the Chicago area. Empire comes to mind. Prison Break was a little bit older, but that was filmed in the Chicago area. And of course, Shameless had outside scenes that were filmed in Chicago and was set on the south side of Chicago. And of course, the entire Chicago franchise. So there's opportunities for industry people in the city of Chicago, and I just wanted us to look at the history that the Chicago style has brought. Thank you for your attention.